Jordan Novgrod, thank you for joining me today on Acquiring Minds.
Thanks for having me.
Jordan, I love when my guests don't fit the mold of the typical acquisition entrepreneur. I would put you in that category for two reasons primarily. First, you were employed at the same place for 17 years, so an almost 2-decade stint as an employer at a single place is not really typical on the resume of an entrepreneur. And second, you were never really interested in personal finance, money, and you only became interested in the topic about 3 years ago, introduced to it by from Rich Dad, Poor Dad, that famous book that has introduced so many to personal finance. And yet here you are, having acquired a business. So not sure the Jordan of 3 years ago would recognize the Jordan of today, but we're gonna hear all about what that journey looks like. So maybe start us off, Jordan, with these 17 years. What were you doing, and what happened that prompted you to? I mean, beyond just reading Rich Dad Poor Dad, how does somebody working for 17 years go to buying a business?
So, I guess 17 years was what I fell into, and I got the salary and all that. I gained enough that it became like the golden handcuffs. You couldn't easily walk away. And while I wanted to start a business, my wife was never supportive of being poor while we did a startup. So every time I tried, she would say, "Hey, wait a minute, that's not going to work for us."
How many times did you try?
A handful.
Okay.
A handful of times.
So you were entrepreneurial. So it wasn't totally out of left field that you would eventually do something entrepreneurial.
Right.
Okay.
I feel like always been entrepreneurial. I did start a business in college that I totally ignored for college. So it didn't last very long, but I do, my family, I guess, has always been entrepreneurial. Most everybody in my family had started or run a business. So, that was kind of normal for me. So finding myself at a job where I stuck for 17 years was out of the norm for my family. And it basically got into, I was working for the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, and doing DoD work. So I was, finding a lot of that stuff very interesting, having gotten engineering degrees. And one thing led to another, and I just kept, finding it hard to break out of that. So then COVID happened, and that changed everything. We decided to sell our house and move to a rental so that we could then have that money available to invest. We decided that we wanted to get closer to my in-laws since they were getting older. We did all that, and then the COVID mandates started happening, and I was totally against the mandates and applied for an exemption and all that. And long story short is it didn't work out. They very much had a draconian style. You'll do what we want or you won't work here. So I knew I wasn't going to be working there for very long at that point. I was ready to dive off and start investing in self-storage. But the economics of that aren't nearly that of buying a business. As a typical search. So
Jordan,
along that journey,
let me hop in here with a couple of questions. I just want to understand. So you read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. You guys sold your house to invest that money. What does that mean exactly? To buy a business, or to get into self-storage, or what?
Okay, so we didn't have a lot in the way of savings. Being a single income household in Maryland is kind of tough. And my wife homeschools our kids, so we just had my income, so we didn't have a lot in the way of savings. well, one of the things we did have was a house that we had bought and renovated. Um, so we did a lot of work on the house, and we decided to pull the equity out of that and then rent so that we could use that money to invest. And it wasn't clear when we made that decision, we didn't know exactly what we were going to invest in, but we knew we wanted to have, cash flowing assets instead of just a liability. So we really took that rich dad philosophy of your house is not an asset to heart and ran with that.
Yeah. And so you read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Sounds like your wife is on board with all this. So is she kind of also going on a personal finance journey alongside you, or you're doing it together?
Yeah, so it took me a while to convince her to read Rich Dad Poor Dad. I think maybe 6 months before she finally did, and then she was totally on board with it, which is what enabled us to do it. Because if your wife isn't on board, you're not going to be
Right.
doing much.
Right. Right. Behind every good searcher, there's a supportive partner. And you. So I imagine, well, I know from our pre-call, you kind of go down the personal finance rabbit hole. So Rich Dad, Poor Dad leads, I assume, to all sorts of videos and personalities and stuff. But you arrive at Sweaty Startup, Nick Huber, who will be familiar to many people listening. And Nick Huber's big thing is self-storage. So you're for a minute there, you're interested in self-storage, correct? But you decided it's too expensive. Just expound on that just a little bit.
Sure. So I had been listening to a lot of self-storage podcasts and all that, trying to get educated. So I understood the space. And in that, I found Nick. And I listened to the one podcast he had on buying a business. And I'd never thought that was a concept. I thought that's what rich people did, right? Never thought that you could go out and, leverage a loan and buy a cash flowing business. So when I discovered that, I was up all night on BizBuySell going, oh my God, it's true. There are actually these businesses.
Yeah.
So I started, I told my wife about that, and she said, that's a lot better idea than self-storage. She was on board with that. So then at that point, I lost my job or quit or both and started full-time searching. So that was in January.
That was in January of this year. Okay.
January of this year, yeah.
Okay. And you didn't like self-storage, not just because you feel like the category has become a little overheated with all the attention that Nick Huber and others are bringing to it, but also because it's just, I think you told me, it just appeals to you less. And why was that?
Well, so you're not really managing much in the way of people. You're mostly managing, boxes, and that's not very exciting. Although I still don't think there's value in self-storage investing. It's just long term.
Yeah.
And, my wife didn't like it because I said, well, we're going to pull in almost no salary for the first 10 years, but then we'll make money. And she didn't like that idea. That. Can't blame her. I can't.
Yeah. Give me your educational background. You're an engineer, you had mentioned, but specifically, could you be more specific?
So I went to NC State and I did a program called Accelerated. So I got a bachelor's and master's in 5 years and in electrical engineering. And so I got convinced to stay technical. And I finished those degrees and then went off and got a job at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab and worked there for that 17 years.
So you are an electrical engineer with a master's and worked for 17 years as an engineer. And yet you find through the duration of as you kind of see success in promotions during those 17 years, that the management piece is not something that you were drawn to, but in fact enjoyed.
Yeah, so actually I didn't go into management because I wanted to climb the ladder or whatever. I kind of went there because I was looking for a job outside and realized my skills were so narrowly focused that I couldn't find a lot of opportunities. So I wanted to find a way to have more opportunities. And in that, I discovered that, hey, management will give me those more opportunities. They expect you to be broader. So I applied for and got a job still at the lab doing management. And what I discovered, as you said, was that I actually enjoyed it. So that was kind of surprising.
And
Helping
what?
people grow and
Yeah.
seeing them succeed really empowers me. So that wasn't what I was expecting. And so I kind of, had a really good manager myself, which helped once I took on that management role and grew. And that kind of made it hard to leave, because I had somebody I trusted above me. Um, but ultimately, that, you know, led to the mandates, and that wasn't too hard after that.
hmm And so you actually, one of the themes often of business buyers, acquisition entrepreneurs is whether or not they're drawn to managing people. Many of the target businesses that acquisition entrepreneurs might look at are blue collar businesses, meaning there's a lot of people management. Some people run toward that, some people run away. And it sounds like earlier in your career you would have run away, but as you matured and got some experience managing, realized that in fact you liked it, and so you were totally embraced that the idea of in fact even wanted it in the business that you acquired.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Great. Okay. So self-storage, categories too hot, seems boring, managing boxes. You like managing people. So are you, at this point, have you narrowed your search criteria to like a blue collar business? What does your search criteria look like?
Yeah, so my search criteria, having read all the standard books, and spent time on Search Funder, a lot of time trying to educate myself on what is a good target and all that. I had narrowed it down to the typical service-based business, right? In high school and all, I did construction, so I figured I'd fit really well with that kind of stuff.
hmm
So I was just trying to find that service-based business where I could scale it and grow it and manage people and not have too high of capital expenditures, that kind of stuff. So that was kind of my search criteria, which ultimately, you know, that's what I was looking for. I ultimately bought a manufacturer. So, there I was kind of like, well, let me look for what's commutable where I currently live, um, and broaden that out and just look at all the businesses that are available, that would be commutable. And so then I discovered it and I'm like, wow, this is the business. And I told my wife, I said, I found it. And she's like, no. She read the teaser and said, yeah, this is it. So, and it ended up being it. So,
And why was her reflex to say no? Because it was manufacturing rather than services?
her reflex to say no was just because that was her attitude every time I brought her one. I'm like, this one looks really good.
She strikes me as one of those people who maybe she just says no to force you to think that much harder and be that much more
Yeah.
persuasive, just to like raise the bar a little bit so that you are more confident in your own thought process. I love it.
Yeah, she was definitely doing that.
When you said commutable, so where were you at that point? You'd already done the move to West Virginia, and what was the radius of commutability?
So my radius commutability wasn't really in miles; it was in time, and I figured an hour
Hmm.
and a half one way was the most that I was willing to drive.
So an hour and a
Yeah,
half radius from where you are in West Virginia, does that get to any metro areas? Does that get to DC or Baltimore?
yeah, it gets basically to both, right?
Okay. Does it get up to Philly?
No,
Does it get to Philly or Pittsburgh?
no.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, still, the DMV, big area, including Baltimore, and that even bigger. So that's pretty good. The Okay, one of the other things about your story, Jordan, is that you have been blogging all the while. You've got a Substack. Of course, there will be a link to it in the show notes. I encourage people to read it. Quick digression. Tell us why you blogged through this experience.
Well, so there was a couple reasons I wanted to blog. First, I wanted to hold myself accountable for making progress, and I figured if I wrote that down, that would make sure I did more than had I not. The second reason is I wanted to make sure that others, even though there are great books and stuff, they still don't get into all the nitty gritty. And so I just wanted to blog those nitty gritties to show, how an actual search went, and maybe help somebody in the future with their search.
Hmm.
Um, and then third, I was looking for, not having contacts in, finance and that kind of stuff, not having an MBA and backing. I was thinking that I might need investors, and what better way for investors to get to know me than to be able to read my journey along and follow. So I wanted to build that trust over time.
As we talk, there were a few of your blog posts that jumped out at me that are well, I mean, they're all relevant to your story, of course, but a few that I want to hook in as we talk. So the first one is your approach to deal flow. So obviously, deal flow is really the name of the game in search, and you were trying to be intelligent about it as possible. So you tried to get upstream on deal flow. I think that your blog post was something along those lines, getting upstream on deal flow. What was your thinking? What was your approach, and what did you learn?
So I guess, trying to figure out how to get upflow on the deal stream was not simple, right? The books just talk about doing that, establish relationships with brokers and get on their short list. It doesn't really talk about the mechanics of how you go and do that. Um, in discussions with the Search Investment Group, because I was trying to be a part of their program, they kind of hinted that what they do is use a CRM and go out to all these brokers and send out, emails to explain the search and get on their list, basically. So I said, well, when they didn't take me, I said, well, I can do this on my own. So I did just that. I collected, scrubbed all the websites for broker information, started compiling that, um, and then started emailing those brokers with a one pager, right? Which I, went on Search Funder and got lots of help on what should I say, what shouldn't I say, that kind of stuff, to clarify that message. And ultimately, what I discovered was that all of those brokers that I initiated that process with, and I gave up on that process about 2 or 3 weeks into it, because all I was getting was the standard listings. And those standard listings were actually like from the worst brokers. They were ones that wanted 20 times cash flow for the business and that kind of stuff. And so I
Jordan,
decided,
hold on a second. Let me jump in. You said you scrub the websites. So by that you mean going on BizBuySell, seeing the brokers alongside listings that are in your target geography and that seem like within the industries or categories that you're interested in, and then sending an email to them that says, that has your one pager and that's basically introducing yourself. And correct so far?
well, actually, by scrubbing the websites, I mean, I went on to like IBBA and Interexo and collected all of the brokers' contact information
Ah,
um, using
okay.
web scraping. So,
Okay. Okay. So you were just getting lists of brokers. You weren't looking yet at BizBuySell and seeing who the active brokers were. Okay. And then you send out emails to all of these folks with your introducing yourself, saying what your target is, one pager about yourself. And then what you find is that this isn't that productive because really you're automatically put on their lists, and it seems to be lists of brokers not really selling quality, not really putting out quality stuff, right?
yeah, a lot of the brokers in Florida, right, are they can be anything from a real estate agent, right? And so I was getting a ton of calls from them wanting to do, buy side engagements. So they wanted to help me find that business. And then if I was getting on a list, the list was always one and I still have them emailing me today, these businesses that, will never sell because they're wildly overpriced and, unrealistic. So that's what I found using that process. And so ultimately what I decided on was to use to do as you said and look at the listed ones on BizBuySell, find those that match, like, okay, this is a business that I'm interested in. Let me find out more information. And then, you know, as with a lot of them, you're going to look at it, you're going to realize this isn't the business for me, or I don't like the hair on this one. And so my goal then was to let the broker know why I didn't want to move forward on this business. And by doing that, I developed much better relationships with brokers. And I could tell of those brokers which ones, like if they were, telling me the cash flow is $1 million, and then you get the sim and it's really 200,000. Well, this is a broker I don't really want to deal with
Yeah.
because they're just inflating everything to unrealistic and it's not worth my time. So
So when you went to BizBuySell and you identified brokers that you wanted to reach out to more specifically, rather than the IBBA scrape, how big was that list? I assume it was a lot, much smaller.
so I mean, I was constantly looking at the listings and then reaching out to every one of those listings that I found
Yeah.
interesting. So it was a whole lot smaller, right? Which is um, what ultimately led me to broaden it up in terms of the kinds of business I was looking for locally.
hmm The other thing that strikes me is, like, one of the things, I mean, BizBuySell is amazing in many ways, but it has the reputation for, the very best businesses are pocket listings and are sold before they ever go public on BizBuySell. Not always. I've had plenty of guests on here who found their business on BizBuySell, but that is certainly the kind of the conventional wisdom you hear in the search funder circles and elsewhere. And there is a lot of truth to it. So is it the best? Are the brokers selling the listings on BizBuySell, are they the best brokers because they haven't been able to sell their listings off market, which is, as we're told, the best, those are where the best listings and presumably best brokers are active.
Sure, maybe so. I don't know. I don't really have a inside knowledge on those brokers. What I will say is I bought my business from BizBuySell,
Mm-hmm.
and the broker I thought was very good. So
Yeah.
he's the type that their brokerage carries one, two, three businesses tops, and they price them right to sell, not to hold on to forever and try to scrape listing contacts or whatever. So that if you can obviously if you're a buyer that's seasoned and has bought many businesses, you're going to get access to deals that other folks that aren't won't. So you know
Yeah. Yeah. Fair enough. And we didn't cover what your search criteria was, other than the geographic constraints. What financially were you looking for?
well, geographically I was actually looking all the way from Pennsylvania to Texas, kind of the whole southeast, um, and then some. Financially I was looking for anywhere over half a million in EBITDA to 2 million. Figuring 2 million would be tough to finance, but right within my capabilities. So um,
That's a
the
broad range, and yes, a $2 million EBITDA business is a big bite for somebody who just read Rich Dad Poor Dad 3 years ago.
well well I mean that at the start I actually looked at a business that was like 330K or something
hmm
in seller discretionary earnings or whatever, and that seemed like hey, that's pretty good money, like if you can grow that, and like great. And then once you figure out how much you're paying for financing and all that, and then all of a sudden that's not very much.
Right.
And I would have made more staying at a job than doing that without all the risk and all that. So that kind of set the lower bounds. I didn't really want to go down to 500 or whatever, but I wanted to stay flexible enough that there were there are more businesses on the lower end, obviously, than there are on the higher end. So
Something tells me that your conversations with SIG, with Robert Graham and Jordan Carter, were influential in this thinking. I mean, a lot of people say it, but they are especially forceful in their argument that searchers should only be looking for 700 EBITDA or 700 SDE and above.
yeah, I mean, and they make I think a very compelling argument because
Yeah.
there is all that risk, and if you're going to do that, you might as well get to the point where you're going to get rewarded for it. So
Sure.
you know,
And also, I learned this rule of thumb late, but it's a great just at a glance you can look at an SDE and have it be more specific, have it be more meaningful to you. Good rule of thumb is when you see SDE, just have it, and that's what you'll be left over with after servicing your debt. If you're doing kind of SBA loan with kind of standard parameters, so if you're looking at that $330,000 SDE business, really you're only going to have what's my math 165 to pay yourself and reinvest in the business and after debt service. So just good rule of thumb for people who don't already know this. Probably most listeners do, but have that SDE to understand what you're left with after servicing your debt. Okay. Well, and Jordan, I either didn't understand or I missed something where you talk about your geographic constraints being an hour and a half from where you live to the entire Southeast. I missed something.
yeah. So I guess I mean to make that clear, I broadened my search. My criteria was the whole Southeast for service-based businesses, and when I decided that I wanted to find more businesses that were closer in terms of being able to commute, that's when I just took away and looked at all the businesses that were for sale. So whether it was a gas station or a car wash or whatever, I just looked at everything that was commutable, instead of staying more narrowly focused.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. So have we kind of exhausted your blog post about getting upstream on deals? That was there? Did we cover everything?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, because eventually, as we already know, the deal that you found was not through any of that. As it turned out, it showed up on BizBuySell.
Yes.
So, is there any takeaway from that? I mean, would you still recommend people do the final method that you arrived at, which was looking at BizBuySell and maybe a few of the other sites, seeing the brokers that are active, and kind of cold outreaching to them? It still worth it? Would you say?
Yeah. Well, I think I wouldn't do cold outreach. I would still inquire about their deal, even if
Right.
they're only marginally interested, so you can get to know them a little better. And they'll actually pay attention to you. If you're cold outreach, and they're good, they're not going to pay any time, and they're not going to give you any time, right? Because they're busy. They got lots of stuff to do, and you're one of the million people bugging them that
Yeah.
probably will never close a deal, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And curious, would you get on the phone with these brokers, or was it all over? Was it all over email that you were kind of developing relationships?
I ended up on the phone with them, but I started out over email. And would I do that? Yeah, I mean, I plan to after some period of time when I get this business running well and where I feel comfortable going and acquiring more businesses. So I plan to use that method.
Well, you will have already done a deal then, so I imagine a lot more doors will open to you, and you'll get a lot more calls back. There's a huge difference between somebody who hasn't ever done a deal and then somebody who has the credibility of having done one, especially if you've then been successful with the business you acquired. So that'll be fun. Okay, so tell us more about the business that you found that you immediately loved and that your wife immediately loved too once she actually was willing to look at it.
So the business is metal fabrication. So we manufacture stuff in metal and plastics, but that includes machining and welding. So we build basically all kinds of different metal things, and it's sort of why it fits is because in my job, I was in management over a small machine shop, um, as part of one of my duties. And so I kind of understood the very basics of the business. You know, in that job, it was not about making money. It was about, just getting stuff done. Um, the finance and all wasn't part of it, but
Yeah.
nonetheless, I did have experience with that. So, and I like building things. I like seeing things built. I'm, hands-on kind of person. So that's why it fit really well. And so, um, once I, decided this was the business to go after, I, did full court press and I met with the owner as quick as I could. We met in person. Um, we hit it off really well. And at that point, my wife was like, it was supposed to be like a 2-hour owner meeting, ended up being like 6. And my wife was like, "Are you ever coming home?" So she knew right away, as I did, that this was definitely the business for me. So
Well, what a lesson in uh, um, buyer seller chemistry, which is another theme that you hear over and over again. I mean, just last week, I was talking to a seller who sold their business, and she said, I had stronger offers than the person I chose, but I liked the energy of the person I chose. So I was willing to receive less money because I felt chemistry with the buyer. And so 6 hours. What did you guys went for lunch, and then lunch became a tour of the shop? How does 2 hours become 6? What did you do for those 6 hours? You weren't literally talking the whole time.
well, we were actually here at the shop after hours, so that the employees didn't know.
Yeah.
And we talked for a good bit of that, and then we did a tour of the shop and lots of questions, and it just kept going and going and going, because I was, interested in learning more. And by the time I left, I told both the owner and the broker that I was going to put in an offer in that I wanted to buy this business. Um,
That's so
and
cool.
so, I then worked within 2 days to put together the offer and get it in. So
So did you have your LOI templates and stuff ready to go, or were you kind of scrambling because you hadn't yet reached that stage in your buying process yet?
no, I hadn't reached that stage. In fact, the broker provided me an LOI template. I found, the ones on the Stanford
Hmm.
pack, and tried to meld those two together and not make it too complicated. And I didn't end up wanting to use a lawyer for that aspect of it. So I just took and used mostly what the broker had done. I ended up with two. One that was far more legally written, that was mostly from the Stanford stuff, and I ultimately chose the less legal one that the broker was familiar with. So
Why did you choose that one?
because
Because
I
you thought
wanted
it
a better
would
chance of
mean
them
less friction?
accepting it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
What did you get the impression that this was going to be competitive?
Um, Yeah, it wasn't clear, right, whether there were other offers on the table when I put mine in. The broker kind of alluded to there were other interested parties,
Of course.
vaguely. Um,
There
I,
never aren't other interested
yeah.
parties.
So, um, but ultimately, it ended up I didn't have a competing bidder, but the business was priced right, and I, felt that the seller was being honest, and ultimately to me that was the most important thing. Like all the shady people that I had interacted with in many other businesses I'd looked at, where people would run literally every expense through the business. Like there was one particular one where it was like there was like $30,000 of Bed Bath and Beyond that was added back. It's like
That person was single-handedly keeping Bed Bath and Beyond in business, by the way.
Yeah. So when none of that was in this deal, it felt right to me. So it was very clean.
Yeah. So you did feel that with a lot of the sims that you looked at that there's a lot of shadiness out there, a lot of mines to avoid.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and maybe that's a fact of those businesses being listed on
Yeah.
those websites, is they're still the bad ones are hanging around, right? So
Yep. Exact. Good. Great point. Yep. The two follow-up questions about this business are more the. Can you tell us what some of the financials were?
yeah. So I mean, the SDE was on the order. It was over 800. And then
Neat.
the price was roughly a little over 3 times the SDE. So that's right down the lane of what I was hoping to find.
What a find. That's phenomenal. And further evidence that not only did you buy something on BizBuySell, but you've found a sizable kind of self-funded searcher special right there
Yeah.
on BizBuySell. The now, what was the hair on this particular deal? What was there to not like about it? Surely there must have been something.
Well, I mean, there's always hair, right? So figuring out
Right.
what that is. In this case, there really isn't a management layer. Like almost all I have, you know, 9 employees and they almost work independent. Like, there's very little in the way of that kind of a management layer, which I would have expected, right? At that size of a business. So, what that ultimately means is that the seller was doing all of that, right? Which
Yeah.
means I will have to do all that, right? And so, um, that some people would run away from that and say, I just don't want to be there in the day to day buying myself a job, right? But I was perfectly all right with that. So I do want to eventually grow to where I'm not in the day to day, but I'm not in any hurry to get away from it at this point.
Well, and it's not necessarily, yeah, buying the job, but it's also, I mean, this is why you buy a business that has sizable SDE because you have the resources to reinvest in making hires. Now that means obviously that you don't take that money out of the business, but you're buying this business to grow it anyway. So let's actually just do some quick public math here. So if it's 800 SDE, following our rule of thumb, I'm not saying this is exactly how your numbers shook out, but following the rule of thumb, you actually, after your debt service, have 400 left over. You want to pay yourself, let's call it between 100 and 200. So that leaves you 250, let's say 200 to 250 to grow the business. And that's certainly enough to hire at least one, maybe two managers, although then you're really not going to have anything left over. But is that kind of how is my math at least a passing resemblance to your plan?
Yeah, I mean that was how I looked at it, and is how I'm, you know, looking at it going forward. So it's the other hair on this deal was the amount of working capital, right? That's how much working capital do you need? And being a manufacturer, it's not, my worry was that there's a whole lot of capital expenditures. The machines can be pretty expensive. How often do you need to buy those, and what does that cost? Well, digging in now, having owned it for 3 months, the capex isn't really an issue, but what most searchers want, right, is a very short working capital cycle, and this business is not short. 90
Hmm.
days. Some of the customers are net 90.
Hmm.
That's a long time to put out money right before you get it
Yeah.
back. So
Yeah.
that part is some of the hair on it. So
Going back to the management layer for a second, um, a follow-up question on the numbers. What is revenue or roughly? So 800 SDE from how much revenue?
About 2.2.
Okay, so a third. So over a third. So that's like whatever, approaching whatever, somewhere between 35 and 40%. And I'm reminded of my episode with Ryan Doyle, who's a searcher who had kind of 7 takeaways from seven things to red flags in businesses that you're looking at to be careful of as a searcher that he's learned from looking at so many deals and realizing like what patterns emerged from the deals that he ultimately said no to. One of them was if margins are too high, like you'd be like, well, how can margins be too high? Like the more margin, the better. It's exactly like what you found. It probably means that the owner is doing everything, and that if you really want to understand what you might do with this business, you should reduce that SDE because you're going to need a manager. If you want to build a growing asset and an asset or a business that you yourself can eventually sell. So here you have 35 to 40% margins in your business. This is a perfect example of that. So I encourage people to listen to that episode. By the way, that was episode 81. Don't be tempted. 8 signs of a bad business. 8 signs, not 7. Returning to your story, Jordan. So the other, can we spend a minute on the nature of this business? I don't know anything about manufacturing. I've said that before when I've had on guests who have bought manufacturing or manufacturing-like businesses. And in fact, in a number of those cases, the folks they say, well, it's a manufacturing business technically, but it's not really. It's more kind of fabrication. Or a recent guest was like, he said, I realized after 6 years of owning my business that I'm not in the manufacturing business. I'm in the e-commerce business. We do some design here, but basically the manufacturer's in China. I'm not really, striking an arc at all. Sounds like yours is a real deal manufacturing business. It's a machine shop. Am I right?
Well, yeah, I mean, yes and no. We do have some products that we make on a continuous basis, but most of what we do is project based. So we have a lot of recurring customers. They come back to us over and over and over, but we build different things for them. So it's not it's a little bit like a manufacturer and a little bit not. So a big portion of the work we do is for water treatment plants, and every one of those is different. And the kind of metal fabrication we do, whether it's stairs or railings or grading, that kind of stuff, it's very unique to each project. So we have to go out and measure it and then manufacture it to match. So
you're distinguishing that from a manufacturing business, and that a manufacturing business is producing a product at scale, and so they're stamping out the same widget over and over and over, whereas yours is kind of custom manufacturing.
Yeah, that'd be a good way to distinguish the two.
And on this point about you recurring and reoccurring, so it sounds like yours would be kind of the classic, I was going to say reoccurring because you have clients coming back, but I'm not sure that is reoccurring technically either. But did that give you pause that it's project based? I mean, that's often something that is certainly not within the sweet spot of what searchers look for, project based businesses.
Correct. So no, because I knew some of the work was that reoccurring work. So we build some things and that portion of the revenue is on the order of 40-50% of the repeat stuff. So that I thought was a good stable base on the project side. To help balance that, the project margins are higher, which help. Mm-hmm. Right. And being that the projects weren't tied to, I looked at pool building businesses and that kind of stuff. And there was a COVID bump for sure in pools. Right. This business, I was like, well, it's infrastructure. If anything, we're at the beginning of needing to replace an awful lot of infrastructure. So that project base to me seems like a good stable spot to be, not necessarily like, now that the pool bump is done, people are going back to work. They don't need their pools anymore.
Yep.
A whole lot more stable in that regard on the economy. So,
sure. Well, the other thing that jumps out at me is a a lot of what you were buying is these relationships that you have with the folks at the local governments or whoever is building the water treatment facilities. And so those relationships presumably were with this owner, this gentleman that you spent 6 hours with on that first meeting. So something that is so incredibly valuable and needs to be transitioned just so are those relationships. Did that strike you as, did you recognize that, and how have you managed that?
Yeah, I mean, so that definitely was one of the risks, right? Is can those relationships transfer? And so when working with the seller, I wanted to make sure that he understood that that's what I was worried about, and when I wanted to make sure, we worked on together to try to transition. And so what has happened is that we've gone out and met each customer um, one by one together, um, and we talk them through the transition and ownership. Um, he's still working in the business, so we still have that in the business. And I think for the most part, those relationships have transferred really well. Um, we have we haven't had a single customer be like, "Oh, we're done." you
Hmm.
know, we haven't actually seen that like trail off or anything else. It's been pretty constant. So, we didn't tell them all on day one. We did that very deliberately after months of owning the business. That way
Hmm.
we could be like, yeah, this happened 2 months ago. You still keep getting your stuff, right? So,
And did you write that contractually into the purchase agreement that he would do that? That he would
um,
introduce you personally, and that, because that strikes me as so important, and maybe something not to be left to a vague understanding or a handshake.
yeah, I don't think we wrote that specifically into the contract. We did write in that he would be in helping
Hmm.
transition, but not the specifics of those relationships. So it was kind of a trust thing.
Hmm.
And again, I felt like I could trust the seller, so that was what I felt pretty comfortable with that happening. So
Hmm.
it has. So
And how many customers are we talking you've gone out and done site visits for the introduction? Just curious.
so at this point, it's been about 5 or 6.
Hmm.
Um, the smaller customers, I mean, we don't don't really care, right? If they're a smaller customer. So the 5 or 6 largest customers are the ones we've done so far.
Okay. Jordan, let's spend just a minute on the business of machine shops. I don't know. So kind of define that for us, for those who are ignorant of the whole world of manufacturing. What is a machine shop? It's something that you see on BizBuySell. You see these types of businesses on BizBuySell from time to time. I see people in Search Fund are asking about them.
Yeah, so a machine shop typically takes metal or plastic and then removes parts of it to build things. So it like cuts away metal, right? Um, with um, with different machines that are computer controlled. So instead of like a 3D printer that builds up, a machine shop takes away material to get to the finished product. So um, we aren't just a machine shop. We also do fabrication and welding, and that's different in that it's not all machine shops have those capabilities. And if you're building handrails, you're not doing that in a machine shop because it would be way too expensive. Nobody'd be able to afford it. But when you're building handrails, there are parts that you do want machined, and so a typical fab shop would pay a machine shop to do part of their work. We do both, so we're able to cross that line. So we do that as well, and welding fabrication is much coarser, not nearly as tight of tolerances. So where a machine shop we can be in talking in thousandths of an inch, in the weld shop we're talking like quarter inch, right?
But in a welding shop, that's where you're creating something, you're building up rather than cutting away. Was that one of the key
You do also
differences?
cut away in a weld shop as well as build up. So it's both.
Okay. Okay. And now that you have shopped for one of these and acquired one and sat in the seat as CEO for 3 months, anything that you might tell searchers who are looking at this category to, what to like, not like, be careful of? Anything come to mind?
No, I mean, I'm loving it. There's not been a day where I haven't been happy to come to work, which, is quite a change from when I was an employee. So, if you like hands-on stuff, you'll like it. You
Okay.
don't, you probably wouldn't.
Okay. Okay. So this is a business where you really gotta, invest in kind of learning and understanding and really what you're actually building and stuff. This is technical, and you need to be drawn to that and enjoy it and learn it.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, to be able to price correctly and understand the dynamics of, you know, um, one of the things the former owner was doing and I'm doing now is figure out how to price stuff correctly, right? If you price it wrong, you could end up losing money instead of
Hmm.
making money. So,
Hmm.
but to do that, you kind of got to understand what the dynamics of that are. So if you're, you know, given a part that they want manufactured that's not machinable, or extremely expensive, you got to understand, well, does the customer really want that, or do they want it to be, you know, functionally, um, workable, or, and so understanding um, that aspect of the technical, it's like you can't just machine out square inside corners, for example, right? Yet a lot of designers will put square inside corners because it's just easy. Well, does the customer really need a square inside corner? Um, and most of the time, the answer is no. But you know, understanding those kind of aspects, I think, is pretty important.
And this is all stuff that you didn't know before. Yes, you're an engineer, so you're kind of, you have an aptitude for this sort of thinking, but you really didn't know any of this stuff before. And what you just described, for example, is something you've learned basically in the last 3 months.
Yes.
Okay. Jordan, I want to close out with talking about a couple of these blog posts that I mentioned. You did a post on day one, so tell us what your first day looked like.
So, I mean, the first day, we decided that I would come in after the former owner announced at a meeting that he had sold the business. So I came in after he'd already told everybody. And our business, we really don't have like daily meetings or whatever. It's a rare event when we get together for anything like that. So I came in and everybody was like dead silent. They looked all shocked and surprised and awful, and so it was quite uncomfortable. But
Okay.
you know, I gave a short speech that said what I wanted to do, why I bought the business, um, and essentially I got okay, we'll give you a chance kind of response, and um, then it was, everybody went back to doing, like I said, they're almost all autonomous. So they went back to doing their work. And it was really, really strange because I wanted to be super excited and they all seemed pretty upset. So we it took a while. I, had to get to know them before they would, let me know what they thought. And, so it's been quite a process, but I think connecting with people is not too hard for me. So after after that first day, I told them all I wanted to take them to lunch, which um, because the office has zero, like, I can't. There's no offices. It's like a cubicle set up, so it's all
Yeah.
open.
Yeah.
I wanted to get the take from each of them on what they wanted, with their job and what they wanted to see with the company, what they thought was wrong with it and that kind of stuff. So I took them all out to lunch individually, which was, it cost me my waistline, but short of that, it was all
Hmm.
good because they really I got so many thanks from that. Like they felt that was really good to get a free lunch and have time to actually just discuss where they wanted to go and what they wanted to do. So that was the beginning of building the rapport that I think now that I've fully gained all their trust. I haven't lost any employees. Um, I think everybody's as happy, if not happier, than they were before. So,
That's great, Jordan. Congratulations. When you said that they all seem pretty upset, is it just simply because people don't like change, or was there something
yeah,
else?
I don't think people like changed at all. And none of them had a clue that it was coming. So
Yeah.
they were all just completely shocked. Um, they probably had in their heads all kinds of, it's going to be this many years before the former owner retires and that kind of stuff. And so they weren't expecting it, I guess.
And the speech that you gave, what were the key points?
So, I mean, I put that in my blog post, but,
Yeah.
it, let's see, I, wanted them to know I bought the business because of them, right? It was very much um, a good business because or providing the value and doing the work. And, I let them know I looked at hundreds of businesses, um, and decided on this one. I let them know my background and, that, I didn't come from money,
Hmm.
that I, you know, worked my whole life. I started working when I was 6. So, I let them know that. I let them know my leadership style. I don't like to micromanage. I don't like to be looking over shoulders constantly, but I do like to reward people that go above and beyond, and you know that kind of stuff. So I let them know all that, um, and I told them what I plan to do by not changing anything in the business for 90 days or very minimally. I let them know I wanted to grow the business over time, but I'm, not trying to be a big company. I don't want to be huge. I just, I think a lot of them really enjoy working for a small company, and the bureaucracy that comes with larger companies, they don't want. So I let them know that. I let them know, you know, what my plan was for, you know, how I planned on trying to grow the business, and then I let them know, um, what I had at stake, and that I just wanted them to give me a chance. So,
What did you have at stake?
pretty much everything. I mean, I put in, like I said, I sold my house and I used the equity, part of that to help buy the business. I put it in my retirement money. We didn't talk about that, but I used the 401k Robs, to fund the other bit, so I don't have any investors, and then the SBA. So, and with, as buying a business, the personal guarantees on everything,
Yep.
everything,
Yep.
even the lease. So, if the business goes down, I'm never crawling out of that hole. So,
And
well,
you told them at least some of that. I mean, you told them about the equity in your house, for example.
yeah, I told them that they had my, entire life savings tied up into it. So,
You know, I haven't heard somebody say that as their piece of their day one speech, but I love that. I feel like it's like you don't want to mention money, maybe is people's kind of instinct, but I think it's really compelling to say what you said because for so many searchers, this is huge. They are, many people are scraping every last nickel to do this, and many can't do it, so they have investors as well. And this is just an enormous swing for almost all of my guests. And maybe if they communicated that just transparently on day one, that it would that their new employees would not only understand how serious this is for them, but it's also it's a little bit of vulnerability on day one, which is can also kind of disarm people. So I love that you said that. Did you come up with that, or does the literature say to mention that?
I I don't think I had heard that in any of the books or anything. I think I felt like, just letting them know what was at stake would help them
Yeah.
come to understand that I wasn't some, rich fat cat just, lording over them kind of view
Yep.
was, how I viewed it. So
Well, it sounds to me like a great day one speech, Jordan, but it sounds like it wasn't effective. I mean, at least immediately.
well,
Everyone went away
well,
grumpy, it sounds like.
yeah, well, I won't claim that it was a smashing success of a speech, but I think it was the seeds that helped them,
Totally.
to gain respect for me. So
Well, and I don't mean to suggest that the speech was the problem. It's just maybe there's no way to give the perfect speech that will assuage people's concerns when they're kind of, broadsided by this news like this.
yeah,
Yeah. And so then when you took everybody to lunch, did you? I recall from your post, a lot of that was just kind of like rapport building, getting to know them personally, rather than sitting them down at lunch and interrogating them about like what should be improved at the business. Does memory serve, or I mean, how much in these conversations, these lunches with folks, were you talking about the business versus just getting to know them personally?
most of it was trying to get to know them personally. I didn't want to, press them. I didn't want them to feel like it was an interrogation or anything like
Yeah.
that. Trying to understand what they thought of the business was more of like, a very broad question that just wanted to get their take on, why they liked or why they wanted to work there, or not, right? Like, none of them told me they were out looking for another job, but I suspect that several probably did entertain that, right? Just being that there was change. So
Yeah. Sure. But they're still there. So
they are.
so far, at least, you seem to be doing something right. Knock on wood. Don't want to jinx it. So, Jordan, you had said in your speech to everybody that you weren't going to change much for 90 days. No big changes for 90 days, and we are right around the 3-month point. So you're at the point where you might actually now implement some big changes. Do you have a list of things that you're gonna of changes you're gonna make, or what? Where's that
Yeah.
stand?
So, I mean, I came in with a list in my head. The more I learned about the business, the more I morphed that list. It's a almost entirely paper business at this point. Everything is printed and filed and, checks are handwritten and mailed out. So one of the things I am changing is bringing more of that online and less of it in paper. So I had planned on implementing CRM and that kind of stuff to help. Now, having been in the business long enough, I'm not sure that is worth the squeeze. You
Mm,
know, so
mhm.
my plans have changed since when I originally came in, but I am implementing changes now. I'm not trying to make any giant abrupt changes, just incremental changes that improve things. For example, we have analog phone lines and fax machines, and we don't really get any faxes, so we're 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 switching over to the digital system. It's already been signed, but it hasn't been scheduled yet. But so we're going to be doing that where everybody will get their own phone line instead of one general number that rings. Those kind of changes are super simple.
Yeah.
Um, I'm making changes in like equipment. Like, we got guys in the weld shop that were sanding stuff with a angle grinder, which wasn't very safe. And I was like, why don't we have a sander? I don't know. So it's like
Mm,
buy a sander, you
mhm.
know, a nice stand sander that'll let them work safer, that kind of stuff. So I'm making those kind of changes, but I'm not trying to, I don't, the systems that are in place, even though they are all in paper and all are very, very methodical and good. So it's just a matter of trying to transition those to digital. Um, and then, right now there is zero marketing. So I am planning to implement some marketing strategy to try to get more business.
Oh, I took it to mean when you said that the implementing a CRM probably wasn't worth it, that you had identified that like a new sales effort or new business development actually wasn't a priority as it turned out. But now you're saying that it is. I mean, if you're
No, it
interested in
is. I
marketing,
just
it
think
is.
it is very much relationship based. So trying to gain those relationships versus cold emailing,
Mm,
right? So the CRM won't gain a lot in value if it's just being a part of a cold email effort versus meeting up with somebody. So one of the strategies that I'm implementing is I'm actually going to push the former owner out into the field to meet with the project supervisors of our current customers more, to get in their face more so that we're more visible.
mhm. The point you made about the methodical systems, even though it's, fax machine, analog phone lines, paper based, you know, but in fact, really tight, well organized systems. This is not the first time I've heard that, and I would caution listeners, like, just because there's paper doesn't mean it's disorganized. I think people conflate those two things. Paper means hot mess, disorganized, backwards. Not necessarily. It just might just mean they haven't gotten around to putting in digitizing stuff, but it still could be really good processes, which means that don't overestimate how much optimization there is just because you see a lot of paper. There's probably some to be had by digitizing all that, but maybe not as much as you think. I assume when a big change does come, it's going to be a first hire, starting putting in that management layer. Correct that assumption if it's wrong, and if it's not wrong and it's right, what do you see your first hire being?
Yeah, so I mean, I haven't really been focused on trying to figure out who to hire first.
Mm,
It's been more of trying to understand, where new customers that are. Um, my feel is that if I can get significant work backlog built up, then hiring will be a lot easier. Right now, it's somewhat being project based. It's ebbs and flows, right? So there's too much work, there's not enough work. There's too much work, there's not
yeah,
enough work.
yeah.
Um, I'd like to get it where there's always just too much work, so that it's easy to hire. You know, I haven't really thought through management hiring. The former owner toyed with the idea of hiring a general manager to run everything. And he was unsuccessful in doing that. And there's some of that alignment of incentives, right? To find the right person that's going to be interested enough that you can pay well enough to do it. It's not simple.
hmm did he actually hire somebody that didn't work out, or he never even was able to hire someone?
He did. He had a trial. He had somebody on a trial basis for like 3 weeks, and he was like, "This just ain't working."
Hmm.
He also went down the whole, like, go to an employment agency and find somebody there, right? And like he tried that method unsuccessfully. So his solution was sell the business.
Oh, that's what prompted him to sell the business,
Yeah,
because he wanted to not be involved doing everything.
right.
It wasn't that. Oh, okay, interesting. Because oftentimes when it's like that, it's like the owner, operator, usually founder, is very territorial and they just want to keep everything on their plate. But he was actively trying to get it off his plate, couldn't crack that nut, and was like, okay, threw his hands up and as I said, he's selling.
Yeah,
Well, yeah, we all know that general managers, small business SMB CEOs, whatever operators, whatever word you want to use for it, are the bottleneck to really being an acquisition entrepreneur, to kind of taking it to the next level of your career as an acquisition entrepreneur, and it's a hard one. I say from hearing from a lot of people, not that I've done it myself. So you'll have to let us know, Jordan. Now that you are in the seat 3 months and you blogged about going through the process of acquisition entrepreneurship, you listened to all the pods, including this one, you read all the books. What's different or surprising about the process from just from versus just consuming the media and content around it?
Well, I mean, I think, the podcast really helped me a lot, because you hear the stories of people that actually did it. And
Yeah.
that's, a little bit different than the polished books where it's like, here's the success and all that. So that really helped, I would say that, it's small businesses are all unique, right? So each one's going to be a little different. And, just being able to, roll with the punches, I think is important. But I wouldn't, because I did listen to all the podcasts, including every one of yours, um,
Hmm.
I felt like I, wasn't really surprised in the process. It was, it was, it's tough. It's not, everybody says, oh, well, in the 11th hour, you're going to have a freak out and there's that kind of stuff. And, in essence, there was something that came up and it was like, oh my, is this really going to be a deal breaker? Like so I mean, all those things did pretty much come to pass as they, as many of your guests have said,
Hmm.
in terms of trying to get a deal over the finish line. That was
Yeah.
not simple.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, congratulations on doing so. Um, i- and Jordan, I do want to hear just one quick thought that you had said on our pre-call about how you feel about acquisition entrepreneurship being a path for middle-class people to build wealth. Can you just
Yeah,
share
so I
the
mean,
audience with the audience
part
that?
part of the motivation I had for going down this route, besides independence, which was certainly one of it, was to be able to build enough wealth in my family that my youngest, who may or may not be able to support himself, can have a life. So to do that in employment, it wasn't really um, feasible. So when I discovered entrepreneur acquisition, I just realized that there was a path there to build real wealth. And so by putting you know by putting capital on the line, by buying a cash flowing asset, I think it's possible to step out of the middle class. Not not there now, but I hope to be, and I think this is the right path to do it. So I think it's very doable by an average person. So you don't have to be a Elon Musk and come up with
Hmm.
some grand startup to step out and be able to build that wealth. So that's what why I view it as such a great path.
Hmm. That's beautiful. Maybe I'll put your answer there at the beginning of the interview. Splice it into the beginning of the interview. That was couldn't have said it better myself. Jordan, thank you so much for doing this. Congratulations on your acquisition. Um, Congratulations for proving everybody wrong about BizBuySell. You found your business on BizBuySell in less than you did your search in 6 months. And here you are. We're hearing the background noise of the business that you now own, the machine shop that you now own. So things seem to be going in the right direction. And I will love to watch you pull yourself out of the middle class over the next few years.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. I love your podcast.
Hey, thanks, Jordan. I love hearing that. So good stuff. Thanks, sir.